Inviolable.
Inviolable.
The inviolability of the country's borders.
Inviolate.
Inviolate.
Invisible.
Invisible.
The house was surrounded by trees and invisible from the road. The plane is meant to be invisible to radar.
Using a telescope, Galileo discovered stars that were invisible to the naked eye.
There's an invisible barrier that keeps women out of top jobs.
Invisible ink.
Invisible ink.
Invitation.
Invitation.
An invitation to speak at a scientific conference.
Roger never turns down an invitation to dinner. Roger never turns down an invitation to dinner.
Attendance at the seminars is by invitation only.
They were always dropping by, usually without invitation.
Kegel traveled to Nicaragua at the invitation of the education minister.
We sent out more than 300 wedding invitations.
Did you get an invitation to Jason's party?
He seemed to take my silence as an invitation to talk.
Leaving the car unlocked is just an open invitation to thieves.
Invite.
Invite.
Who should we invite to the party?
Gail invited me to stay with her while her husband was out of town. Gail invited me to stay with her while her husband was out of town.
Why don't you invite her for a drink at the club one evening? Why don't you invite her for a drink at the club one evening?
I'm afraid I wasn't invited.
Anyone interested in contributing articles is invited to contact the editor. Anyone interested in contributing articles is invited to contact the editor. Anyone interested in contributing articles is invited to contact the editor.
Any government that sells arms to dictators is inviting trouble. Any government that sells arms to dictators is inviting trouble.
Why don't you invite Barbara along? Richard often used to invite me back for coffee after the show. If you keep arguing with Jerry, they won't invite us back. After a few seconds, the door opened and Mrs. Barnes invited me in. We invited Clarissa out for ice cream.
Max has invited me over for dinner.
Inviting.
Inviting.
The log fire looked warm and inviting.
She smiled, invitingly.
In vitro fertilization.
In vitro fertilization.
In vivo.
In vivo.
Invocation.
Invocation.
Invoice.
Invoice.
Invoke.
Invoke.
The UN threatened to invoke economic sanctions if the talks were broken off.
A painting that invokes images of the Rocky Mountains. During his speech, he invoked the memory of Harry Truman.
St. Genevieve is often invoked against plagues. St. Genevieve is often invoked against plagues.
Invoking the spirits of their ancestors. Invoking the spirits of their ancestors.
Involuntary.
Involuntary.
When Willie tapped on the window, Miguel gave an involuntary jump.
Involuntary part-time workers. Involve.
Involve.
What will the job involve?
I didn't realise putting on a play involves so much work.
Running your own business usually involves working long hours.
These changes will involve everyone on the staff.
There have been 4 accidents involving Forest Service planes.
Try to involve as many children as possible in the game.
We want to involve the workforce at all stages of the decision-making process.
Riley involves himself in every aspect of his company's business.
Involved. Involved.
More than 30 software firms were involved in the project. I don't want to get involved in some lengthy argument about who is to blame. I'm afraid your son's been involved in an accident.
Landell has been involved with the Hercules project for years. Mrs. Cummings has been actively involved with the church for years.
Most people don't realize the amount of effort involved in writing a novel. The senator denied that he was romantically involved with a member of his staff.
Fathers are encouraged to be more involved with their families.
The plot was so involved that very few people knew what was going on.
Involvement.
Involvement.
School officials say they welcome parental involvement. School officials say they welcome parental involvement.
His new book examines the United States' involvement in World War II.
Carey's possible involvement with a series of robberies.
Sporting involvements.
Her political involvements.
Weaver admitted a strong emotional involvement in her client's case.
Donna knew nothing of her husband's involvement with another woman.
Invulnerable.
Invulnerable.
Jerry's confidence made him feel invulnerable.
We will not be satisfied until this city is safe and invulnerable to attack.
Inward.
Inward.
A feeling of inward satisfaction.
Inward panic.
I managed to smile, but inwardly I was furious.
Inward investment.
Inward investment.
Inward looking.
Inward looking.
Inwards.
Inwards.
A breeze blew the curtains inwards.
Inward.
Inward.
The latest inward amongst teenagers.
In your face.
In your face.
Iodine.
Iodine.
Iron.
Ion.
Yun.
Ion.
The completion of the task.
His election to the post.
Young children demand a lot of attention.
Ionic.
Ionic.
An ionic column.
Ionize.
Ionize.
Ionizer.
Ionizer.
Ionosphere.
Ionosphere.
Iota.
Iota.
It won't make an iota of difference.
IOU. IOU. IPA. IPA.
IP address. IP address. IP address. IPC. IPC.
IPO.
IPO.
iPod. iPod.
Ipso facto.
Ipso facto. IQ. IQ.
An IQ of 130.
Ear.
Irregular.
IRA.
IRA.
Irascible.
Irascible.
An irascible old man.
Irate.
Irate.
An irate customer.
Ire.
Ire.
The proposal has drawn the ire of local residents. Iridescent.
Iridescent.
Small iridescent blue flies.
Iridium.
Iridium.
Iris.
Iris.
Irish.
Irish.
Irish coffee.
Irish coffee.
Irishman.
Irishman.
Irishwoman.
Irishwoman.
Irish stew.
Irish stew.
Iris print. Iris print. Iris scan. Iris scan.
Irk.
Irk.
Irksome.
Irksome.
An irksome journey.
Have you ever met him, IRL?
Iron. Iron.
The iron and steel industry.
A driveway with large iron gates.
Iron ore.
The absorption of iron from food.
He has several economic irons in the fire, including gold and diamond mines. A 5-iron. Leg irons.
Have you ironed my shirt? We need to iron out a few problems first.
He runs the company with an iron fist.
Iron Age.
Iron Age.
Ironclad.
Ironclad.
An ironclad guarantee.
An ironclad battleship.
Iron Curtain.
Iron curtain.
Iron grey.
Iron grey.
Ironic.
Ironic.
Your car was stolen at the police station. How ironic.
It's ironic that her husband smoked for 30 years, and yet she's the one who died of lung cancer.
In an ironic twist, the most trustworthy character in the film turned out to be the thief.
Ironic comments.
When I told Lucy I loved her book, she thought I was being ironic.
Ironically.
Ironically.
Ironically, his car got better on the last day of his holiday.
Oh, no problem, said Terry ironically.
Ironing.
Ironing.
I hate doing the ironing.
I'm tired and there's still a pile of ironing to do.
Ironing board.
Ironing board.
Iron lung.
Iron lung.
Ironmonger.
Ironmonger.
Iron rations.
Iron rations.
Ironware.
Ironware.
Ironwork.
Ironwork.
Irony.
Irony.
Life is full of little ironies.
The tragic irony is that the drug was supposed to save lives.
Wagner calls his program the worst talk show in America without a hint of irony.
Of course Michael won't be late. You know how punctual he always is, she said with heavy irony.
Irradiate.
Irradiate.
Irrational.
Irrational.
An irrational fear of flying.
He's becoming increasingly irrational.
Irreconcilable.
Irreconcilable.
The differences between the landowners and the conservationists were irreconcilable from the start.
This belief was irreconcilable with the Church's doctrine of salvation.
Irrecoverable.
Irrecoverable.
Irrecoverable loss of sight.
The insurance premium is wholly irrecoverable.
Irredeemable.
Irredeemable.
Very few children are irredeemable.
Irreducible.
Irreducible.
Irrefutable.
Irrefutable.
Irrefutable proof of his innocence.
Irregardless.
Irregardless.
Irregular.
Irregular.
A jagged, irregular coastline.
It has a highly irregular shape, covered in bumps and indentations.
He's receiving medication for an irregular heartbeat.
Beamish only returned to Britain at irregular intervals.
Funeral directors often work long, irregular hours.
It would be highly irregular for a minister to accept payments of this kind.
The club were found guilty of financial irregularities.
Irrelevance.
Irrelevance.
Debates on the irrelevance of the education system.
Irrelevant.
Irrelevant.
We are focusing too much on irrelevant details.
Students viewed Latin as boring and irrelevant.
His age is completely irrelevant if he can do the job.
The defendant's lawyer argued that his past offences were irrelevant to this case.
Irreligious.
Irreligious.
Irremediable.
Irremediable.
Irreparable.
Irreparable.
Extensive mining will cause irreparable damage to the area.
Irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable.
Works of art were lost, many of them irreplaceable.
Irrepressible.
Irrepressible.
An irrepressible optimist.
Irreproachable.
Irreproachable.
Irresistible.
Irresistible.
Tax-cutting proposals could prove irresistible to lawmakers.
Men find Natalie irresistible.
I was overcome by an irresistible urge to cry.
Irresolute.
Irresolute.
Irrespective.
Irrespective.
The course is open to anyone, irrespective of age.
Irresponsible.
Irresponsible.
When it comes to money, Dan is completely irresponsible. It would be irresponsible not to turn up for work without calling.
It was highly irresponsible of him to leave the children on their own in the pool.
He was acting totally irresponsibly.
Irretrievable.
Irretrievable.
The irretrievable breakdown of their marriage.
Irretrievably lost.
Irreverent.
Irreverent.
His irreverent sense of humour.
She has an irreverent attitude towards marriage.
Irreversible.
Irreversible.
Fossil fuels have caused irreversible damage to the environment.
Miller is in an irreversible coma.
Irreversible blindness.
His reputation was irreversibly damaged by the affair. Irrevocable.
Irrevocable.
Think about the situation carefully before you take an irrevocable step.
Machines that irrevocably change the pattern of rural life. Irrigate.
Irrigate.
The water in Lake Powell is used to irrigate the area.
Major irrigation projects.
Irritable.
Irritable.
Joe was tired, irritable, and depressed.
Irritable bowel syndrome.
Irritable bowel syndrome.
Irritant.
Irritant.
Low-flying aircraft are a constant irritant in this area.
A skin irritant.
Irritate.
Irritate.
It really irritates me when he doesn't help around the house.
This cream may irritate sensitive skin.
Irritated.
Irritated.
John was getting irritated by all her questions.
Her throat and eyes were irritated.
Irritating.
Irritating.
He's the most irritating man I've ever met.
He was smiling in a way I found very irritating.
She has an irritating habit of interrupting. A dry, irritating cough.
Irritation.
Irritation.
The heavy traffic is a constant source of irritation.
The doctor's irritation at being interrupted showed.
The astringent can cause irritation to sensitive skin.
The children are just an irritation for him when he's trying to work.
A throat irritation.
Eruption.
Eruption.
Is.
Is.
Isation.
Azation.
ISBN.
ISBN.
ISDN.
ISDN.
Eyes.
Eyes.
Ish.
Ish.
Are the British unfriendly?
Learning to speak Turkish. She's Swedish.
Spanish food. Foolish behaviour.
Don't be so childish. Don't be so childish.
Snobbish.
Selfish.
Youngish.
Tallish.
Reddish hair.
We'll expect you around 8ish.
He's 40-ish.
Islam.
Islam.
Islamist.
Islamist.
Islamophobia.
Islamophobia.
Island.
Island.
The Cayman Islands.
The Greek island of Crete.
No cars are allowed on the island.
Islander.
Islander.
Isle.
Isle.
The British Isles.
Islet.
Islet.
Ism.
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 Socialism.
Buddhism. His criticism of my work.
Her witticisms.
Heroism.
Magnetism.
Alcoholism.
Sexism.
Racism. Isn't.
Isn't.
ISO. ISO.
An isotherm.
Isobar.
Isobar.
Isolate.
Isolate.
The town was isolated by the floods.
The U.S. has sought to isolate Cuba both economically and politically.
Presley's phenomenal early success isolated him from his friends. Presley's phenomenal early success isolated him from his friends.
Newborn babies must be isolated from possible contamination.
It is impossible to isolate political responsibility from moral responsibility.
The hepatitis B virus has been isolated from breast milk.
Isolated.
Isolated.
Small isolated communities.
Not many people visit this isolated spot.
Young mothers often feel isolated.
Police say that last week's protest was an isolated incident.
Isolation.
Isolation.
Because of its geographical isolation, the area developed its own unique culture.
The isolation of rural areas. The country's continuing political isolation. The political prisoner had been held in complete isolation.
The mansion sits in splendid isolation on top of the hill. Scarlet fever victims had to go to the isolation hospital.
A patient's isolation period.
Retirement can often cause feelings of isolation.
Elderly people living in social isolation.
The future of healthcare cannot be considered in isolation from economic factors.
Isolationism.
Isolationism.
Isolationist policies.
Isometrics.
Isometrics.
Isosceles triangle.
Isosceles triangle.
Isotherm.
Isotherm.
Isotonic drink.
Isotope.
Isotope.
ISP.
ISP.
Israeli.
Israeli.
The Israeli government.
Israelite.
Israelite.
Issue.
Issue.
Abortion is a highly controversial issue.
We should raise the issue of discrimination with the council.
The key issue is whether workers should be classified as employees.
The article appeared in the January issue of Nature.
Have you seen the latest issue?
It is difficult to take issue with this analysis.
I must take issue with you over what you said yesterday.
I was upset by Eleanor's remarks, but didn't make an issue of it.
There's a self-help group for people who have issues with money. There's a self-help group for people who have issues with money. I have a few issues with Mark.
At issue here is the extent to which exam results reflect a student's ability. At issue here is the extent to which exam results reflect a student's ability.
The issue of identity cards to all non-residents.
We launched the share issue on March the 1st.
A new issue of bonds.
Silver issued a statement denying all knowledge of the affair.
A warning issued by the Surgeon General.
The U.S. State Department issues millions of passports each year.
All the workers were issued with protective clothing.
The policy document will be issued to all employees.
A low grunt issued forth from his throat. Smoke issued from the factory chimneys.
Ist.
Ist.
A Buddhist.
An atheist.
A Scottish nationalist.
Her socialist views. Rightist parties.
A linguist.
A novelist.
A guitarist.
A machinist. A very sexist remark.
They're a bunch of racists.
Isthmus.
Isthmus.
The Isthmus of Panama.
IT.
It.
Where's your office? It's on the 3rd floor.
I love the spring. It's a wonderful time of the year.
There were people crying, buildings on fire. It was terrible. Don't blame me. It wasn't my idea. This little beast is a lemur, and it lives in Madagascar.
I can't stand it any longer. I'm resigning.
How's it going, Bob? I haven't seen you for ages. And the worst of it is the car isn't even paid for yet. Stop it, you two. You're just being silly.
It worries me the way he keeps changing his mind.
What's it like being a sailor?
Apparently it's cheaper to fly than to go by train. Apparently it's cheaper to fly than to go by train.
It's a pity you couldn't come.
It seems that we are not welcome here.
I found it hard to concentrate.
Is it still raining?
It was 4 o'clock, and the mail still hadn't come.
It's my birthday today.
It's over 200 miles from London to Manchester.
It gets dark very early in the winter.
It's 3 years since I last saw her.
It's Lawrence you should be talking to.
It was malaria that killed him.
It was in New Zealand that Elizabeth first met Mr. Cronje. It was in New Zealand that Elizabeth first met Mr. Cronje.
What will you call it if it's a boy? Who's that over there? It's Robert Morley. Hello, it's Frank here.
It's all right. It's only me.
Have you done it with him yet?
We would have arrived much earlier if it hadn't been for the snow.
In a job like advertising, you've either got it or you haven't.
This is it, boys. The moment we've been waiting for.
That's it then. There's nothing more we can do. Slowly, slowly. Yeah, that's it.
That's it. I'm leaving.
Just because he got a higher mark, he really thinks he's it.
I've managed to get my hands on this season's It bag.
Italian.
Italian.
Italianate.
Italianate.
An Italianate villa.
Italicize.
Italicize.
Italics.
Italics.
This example is written in italics.
Italic script.
Italo.
Italo.
A joint Italo-German proposal.
Itch.
Itch.
My feet were itching terribly.
The label on this shirt itches me. The label on this shirt itches me.
He was itching for a fight.
Scratch my back. I have an itch.
An itch for adventure.
Itchy.
Itchy.
My eyes sometimes get red and itchy in the summer.
An itchy rash. These tights are all itchy.
He's had that job now for about 8 years, and he's starting to get itchy. I've only been back home for a few months, and I've already got itchy feet.
I tuck the bills deep into my pocket, away from itchy fingers.
Itted.
Itted.
I'd do it if I thought it'd help.
Ite.
Ite.
A group of Trotskyites. The Pre-Raphaelites. His Reaganite opinions. A Brooklynite. The Israelites.